it's really a delight to bring up Joe Gebbia, who I was introduced to through Frank, and again, through whose good graces is why we are at this magnificent hotel. And I knew of Joe because, as Frank had said, Joe is working on all kinds of solutions to various threats using, we're a confederation of states. We've got states with rights and so on, and we've sort of forgotten that. To me, the 17th Amendment was the destruction of the beginning of the destruction of the country, when states no longer took it upon themselves to exert their states' rights against the federal government. But what Joe has been working on is getting the states to stand up in various arenas to stop a lot of overreach, in particular relating to China. But he's also been working with the Sovereignty Coalition. So please welcome Joe Gebbia.
Anybody want to get a cup of coffee? Can wake you up here before I continue? Last chance here. So there's so many things I can talk to you about, and I've tried to take some notes here to keep myself confined. And my wife tells me, you got to keep it concise. She also tells me that, when you talk to people, it's always, they're stressed, and they're walking, and it's dark conversations. She says, you got to lighten it up. You got to let them know their hope. So when I talk to Karen about, what do you have me down for a topic? She says, you're going to be the good news of this. So the pressure's on to do this. And there is good news to share, and I'm happy to do it. Let me make sure I stay concise here. So basically, tell you what I'm going to try and cover with you today. My area of concentration is on China. I'm going to make some comments on that, some of the things that were said here today. I'm going to get into State Shield, which is a C3 that I started last year, and I'll explain it to you. I'm going to give you a readout on successes, primarily about the actions that's being taken on the WHO, the World Health Organization, obviously. I'm going to end with some warning signs, so it won't be as bright as you think, but it's still encouraging. And I'll try to keep that to 30 minutes to do this. So on the China, whenever I give my talks, my educational seminars on this, I always start off with the phrase, China is at war with the United States. And I don't have to say that to you all because you know. But it's amazing how many people out there are really not aware. And that's a real problem we have in the United States. It's with everything that's going on, is that we've been lulled into complacency. And we have this attitude that we're Americans and we're the best in the world at what we do, and we are. But it gives us a sense false of security. And we're now coming to the point where I have to pay the piper. And China is the one that's creating this. There is an awakening taking place. And I have seen it because when I started State Shield back, when the idea was birthed in March of 23, I was at an RGA meeting, of which I am an executive roundtable member. I'll put this out there so you know my perspective. I'm an executive roundtable member with RGA, executive roundtable member with the NRSC, which is the National Republican Senatorial Committee, and now I'm also on what's the equivalent of that level with the Republican Attorneys General's Association. So I'm on the inside track with these three organizations, trying to create what Frank has done with Sovereignty Coalition, which is where we've brought in 28 currently outside activist groups and put them into one silo. Instead of having all these separate actions, we've consolidated the energy, the influence, the power, and we're working in concert, and it's having a dramatic effect. And this morning, we actually entered the international arena officially. And I'll have some comments to you what I think is going to happen on that. We were talking to 11 MPs from Israel on a special call, and they reached out to us, Sovereignty Coalition, Frank, myself, and Merrill Nash, about their concerns about what's going on with the WHO. So we're going to step this to the next level on an international, try to get an international conference going within a week to show the press about how this really needs to be dealt with. It needs to be dealt with in a parliamentarian way, not as a dictatorship telling you what's going to happen. So things are really happening. Well, again, I'm getting off course already. Congratulations, Joe. So China is at war with the United States. And if you haven't figured it out yet, it's point blank. Their goal is our utter destruction. No other way to put it. They want to become the international hegemonic power in the world. They want to be the one in charge. And there are some very, very serious implications that come with that. We'll get that in a second. We talked about a couple of dates here. We talked about 2027, Taiwan. Well, the Chinese have been saying for years that they want to take over Taiwan by 2027. And the other date is 2049, and that's Xi Jinping's comments that that's when they're going to be the hegemonic power in the world, and it happens to just correlate with the 100-year anniversary of the creation of the Communist Chinese Party. But this whole movement actually began in 1949. When the Communist Party was created, their purpose was to reclaim their position in history as the greatest society. And unfortunately, we didn't listen to what they were saying. And they were telling us all along what they were doing. We were blinded by first globalism and how that would help the world. And we gave away our manufacturing. We had this conversation already today. We don't need to go through it again. But we were blinded by it. It's very similar to what happened with the EU with Brexit. I mean, England went through the same thing, and they knew that globalization and being a part of a bigger community really wasn't in the best interest of their self-identity. Well, we did it in America, and we were blinded by the greed factor of money. And it's an illness that we still have. We have so many captured elites. Probably when it comes to China, the biggest enemy is from within. A big part of the problem is from within. You've heard so many comments today about what's going on. Well, it was here before Biden and his administration and all the negative things that are happening. And it's an ill of capitalism. It's built the greatest society, the greatest economy, the best nation in the world with the biggest experiment. But we're going to have to find a way to make sure that we're balancing out national security with how we handle our investments, because we financed China to where they are today. And that's a major lesson for us to make sure that we address. How many people here have heard of a natural asset company? Raise your hand. Okay, this is a pretty well-informed group here. And then you know about the WHO, and you know that this fall, the United Nations is going to be looking at taking moves to create high-level powers for themselves, authoritarian powers. This has all been in the records. It's in the Biden administration's records, and they just put a revised version of it out in their April 2024 national security briefing. And the NACs started last October, and they were supposed to take effect within 45 days. And that was that collusionary effort between the SEC and the New York Stock Exchange to create a new asset class to monetize nature, for those who may not be aware of it. And it was a diabolical plan. I could see in a way why they wanted to do it, though, if you really want to think about it from an economic standpoint, because we've got a debt level and we have a GNP level, and there's a big gap between that. It's trillions of dollars. You got the New York Stock Exchange over here doing its business and basing it upon what GNP can be doing, so it's like almost like a Ponzi scheme. If you got this debt level that can never be balanced out, excuse me. So if you can create an asset class that's bringing you trillions and trillions of dollars, you can fill that gap. So it makes economic sense in a way if you put yourself in their shoes. And now you've got a smaller range of where the debt is and where you need to be to balance out. Interesting concept. But it's built on quicksand. And the cost to us as a nation for doing that is everything that we're fighting with the WHO right now. So this was timed. The NACs were supposed to come and be in place And with the NACs came that concept of One Health. You all know about One Health, right? I'll explain here in a quick second. It means equality in measuring the value between humans, animals, and plants. It's the equity in how it's an equity. It's a DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, if scheme in a sense, of putting the three elements together when making decisions about how you move forward. And the NACs took the federal land that Biden wasn't totally in favor of this. President Biden was totally in favor of this. He was offering up the federal land for this umbrella effect that was the natural asset, and it was offered to sovereign nations, which would have been one of the 4 countries of concerns as set by the Commerce Department, which would have been obviously Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. And they could buy a NAC, and then they could control the environment. And the environment would be anything from CO2 to carbon monoxide to methane gas. And it said specifically in the NAC, in 3 different sentences, 3 different paragraphs, the exact wording that the operator of a NAC is prohibited from mining for oil or for drilling for oil or mining. So it was an anti-fossil fuel bill. And it was designed to be passed and in effect before the next president came. So when President Biden was out there in the past few years and not giving oil rights to federal land, so the federal land, by the way, is utilized by the states. They lease it back so they can do logging, grazing, mining, drilling, recreational, a lot of money. In states like Nevada and Utah make their money off how they handle the federal land. So when this whole process came out, and I'm going to make this a really quick conversation on this, it was pretty obvious that this was going to have, they were going to be contained in what they were going to be able to do moving forward. And if a sovereign nation like China was to come over and buy land, but buy this NAC, they didn't have to buy the land anymore now. They could just control the environment. And if they happened to be in an area where we were mining for rare earth minerals, which is essential for our national security, because most of those are controlled by China right now, they could simply say, you can't mine here anymore, you've got to buy your rare earth minerals from China. Or if you're Saudi Arabia, you come over and you buy the covered area where the United States is drilling for oil or natural gas and say, sorry, you can't drill anymore, you've got to buy your oil from OPEC. I mean, the potential threat to us as a country was absurd. So now that was brought to a halt on January 18th in a Hail Mary pass, because Sovereignty Coalition, and we were just really collectivizing ourselves at the time, created enough noise and enough havoc and enough attention to this, because the media didn't cover this. So to get out there with this kind of messaging was really, really difficult. It's a David and Goliath battle, as is the WHO. But on the 18th, which was the last day for comments, the New York Stock Exchange pulled its application because they were getting so much attention. It finally reached the Congress where they were talking about doing hearings. And that was a lot of effort and a lot of work on a lot of people's parts. So now fast forward just a couple of months and we're dealing with the WHO. And guess what the WHO has in their whole strategy? They're coming up with the One Health concept. So it was specifically planned to parlay off of what the NACs were representing. Now, if the NACs had happened, and now the WHO happens, it's setting the stage for what's going to happen in the fall with the United Nations. I mean, this is all pre-planned. The one thing that we really haven't come to terms with, and it had been mentioned here, we touched on it, Connie, you did for sure, is that in 1949, when China started doing what it was doing, and they really intensified, and then they got their economy changed and started working in the 70s and 80s, and then globalization came, and NAFTA, and then the WTO. They had implemented their strategy to replace us. And here's 2 really good key examples that the press never picked up on, and I'm not sure most of you did, but I'll repeat my perception of it. Well, let's just take a look at Obama in 2014 or 2013 in his first year. Xi Jinping came to the United States and met with Obama. You know, at the end of their get-together, they give a little speech at the end, and they all give their recap of what they talked about. Well, Xi Jinping at that time closed out his comments by saying, and we in China believe that there's room for two superpowers in the Pacific. Okay, they tell us what they were planning on doing. Now I'm going to fast forward to December 2023, and Xi Jinping comes to San Francisco and meets with President Biden. And they had their little talk, and at the end of that talk, Xi Jinping gets out there, and one of his closing comments was, well, we in China believe that there's room for two superpowers in the world. Okay, they already know they pretty much got the Pacific handled if they had to. I mean, they've outmanned us militarily, and I don't believe our intelligence is having positive outcomes when they do their war theories about how that works. And if it does get into a battle, it's going to be extremely costly, especially on the Seventh Fleet. So they've been working at this for a long time, and they are very, very, very good at what they do. They are so refined. The best way for me to describe that to you is TikTok. So when we talk about what's the battle, you can really summarize, say, at the end of the day, the battle is information. Whoever has the most information wins at the end of each day when this goes on. TikTok is a part of that. Because the more information that they get, the better they're able to structure their algorithms and get into the mind that Connie was talking about. I mean, this is so dark. And this is why my wife says, you can't keep having these conversations with our friends. We're going to lose all our friends. But this situation really is serious. And our nation is at risk. This 250-year test that we're going through as a nation is really at the edge of the cliff and getting ready to fall off. It's that dire. I know I'm supposed to end with good news. Believe me, I am. I need to do it for my psyche too, I have to tell you. All right, well, then let me move on to that. I wanted to share that perception with you. And the bottom line of what's really going on here and what's going to suffer on all this is everything that we talked about. It's really a value system. So what was the value of the United States after World War II? Was what we did is we brought our value for free trade and then used our military to keep the shipping lanes open. So the world could prosper, the world could be saved. We did that. We helped raise the world. A lot of people out of poverty, created economies. Chinese they have a whole different value system. Their primary value system, and it's been stated, is the nation, the state. And Xi Jinping has solidified that. So he solidified it first by making himself president for life. Then he instituted his national security policies that basically says anybody who has a company is part of the PLA and the CCP, and we have the rights to all of your information. And that was already referred to, so they strip the IP and they take it and then they compete against them. I mean, Tesla is finding this out now in China. You have to, in what they do. So a lot of these companies are in tough positions, especially the ones that gave everything and said, we're going to put all of our nails in one bucket over here with you. And now they're caught between a rock and a hard place. So when you look at the value system of China, a distant second is the individual. And their biggest threat to them is that we have a constitution and a Bill of Rights. And if they're going to achieve their goal of becoming the hegemonic power, we become a really strong obstacle as long as we have that constitution and that Bill of Rights. Well, what's going on with the WHO right now is we're at risk of piercing the American Constitution for the first time with an international treaty. That is extremely dangerous. That's like taking a needle, COVID-19, and sticking it in your arm and putting that liquid in your arm, and then it spreads through your body. Once that veil is pierced, it's the beginning of the end, because then it morphs like a cancer. So let's talk about the WHO. This has been coming for years. 5 days after President Biden was in office, this thing really started to tick up. He put an individual in charge of developing the NACS, which was phase 1. Phase 2 is the WHO, and then supporting the United Nations and what they're doing here in the fall. All of this was designed to be in place before the next president is elected. for example, with the NACs, if that got into being, then executive decisions could no longer make decisions like, okay, we're going to open the pipeline, or we're going to drill in federal land, or we're not going to drill in federal land. So it was designed that if it was a Democratic president going in for the next election, well, that's good. That's the policies that they want. But if it was a Republican, it wouldn't. And the reason why the WEF, the World Economic Forum, is supportive of all this is because they don't like to have inconsistency. They need to have consistency. And that's why Xi Jinping in China is looked at, this is the model, this is the type model government that the WEF wants because it's consistent, because it's autocratic rule. And you get people like Trudeau who says, oh, I have the highest regard for how the Chinese government runs. Or, you get these acolytes that come out of the WEF and they're giving them praise. And, it's not based on a value system that is consistent with who and what we are, with individual freedoms and the right to make our own decision and fulfill our life the way we want instead of being puppets. So let me get to the good news. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to get into some detail here because it's new information, and I'm doing it for you and the folks that may have a chance to watch this on the video later. State Shield. I started State Shield, as I told you, March of last year, the concept. I actually formalized it in December. And what I decided was, what I identified was a federalist form of government. Our federalist form of government separates the national from federal government from the state's government. And we don't interact a lot. It's usually the 10th Amendment. Any right not so designated to the federal government is automatically defaulted to the states, which, by the way, is healthcare. So there's a 10th Amendment violation here, which is why I got the AGs involved, but I digress. So the Chinese knew this, and they were leveraging for this. So the idea of bringing the states in was really, really important, especially seeing the lack of activity on the federal government's part. The states were stepping up piece by piece and having to deal with federal issues, i.e. the border. Is that not the example of where the government is failing? And they have repeatedly failed. There are numerous instances that could be cited. The border stands out as the example. So now governors are learning how to step up to the plate. So just like Sovereignty Coalition has evolved, what I wanted to do was create a silo for the states. And I went and I said at the first meeting at the RGA, I said, it was March 23, and there were 4 governors having a conversation about China. It was the negative impacts of the CCP on the states. And it was the first time we had just come out of COVID and everybody was happy just to be together again. And I was really excited to hear this talk. And it was great to hear them talk. But it was pretty apparent that the intensity of the conversation was nowhere near what it had to be. I mean, I wasn't super updated on it, but I was fairly well informed. And it was pretty obvious to me that we weren't having the level of conversation that we needed to have. So I raised my hand. I paid my dues so I could raise my hand. And I said, I think this is a really important conversation. I think we're really late to the game. And I think it's important for us to prioritize this at every future meeting. And, I don't think I got the warmest reception from the governors, but I was the last questionnaire, and then that basically shut down the conversation. Immediately, 20 people came around me like I was a magnet. I wasn't ready for this, I have to tell you. What can we do to help you? And I said, uh-oh. I had no idea what I had just started, but I had some great people. So I had the idea. So I thought I could run it through the RGA, but that's not their role. Their role is just to be a facilitator for the governors. So I had to start my own C3 in order to do this. Well, it ended up where I put together a program for them at their April meeting in Aspen. It was the biggest meeting of the year. And I had proven myself from March up until just before July that I was really working hard at this, and I did some really good things for the RGA that they were appreciative of. And I brought them a program for the main stage, and they gave it to me. I was really shocked. I brought in Elbridge Colby and Kyle Bass, if you know who they are. Elbridge Colby was the assistant national security advisor to President Trump from 17 to 19, and he helped structure the China policy. Ooh, is that right? 3 minutes? Oh, golly. I saw a 0. I saw 30 minutes. All right. Well, I'm not going to go through that. I'm going to get to these comments real quick. So what happened just recently is there's a company called Us to Them. I want to make sure I give them credit here. Us to Them. And they did a briefing on the current state of the amendment updates. So there's two things with the WHO. There's the amendments, and then there's the pandemic treaty. Pandemic treaty requires 2/3 vote to get, but the amendments only require a voice vote at 50%. And it's up to Tedros, Dr. Tedros, who we all know, how discredited he is, to make that decision whether or not he has 50% of the vote. And there's no accountability. So I'm going to tell you some of the things going on with the amendments that are pretty impressive. And for some reason, these are out of order, but I'll put them back real quick. So the good news. I'm going to give you some article numbers because this is really where it lies. And for you who are in it, great. For those who aren't, you need to get oriented on this. It's Article 13A.1. It says, it would have required members of states to follow directives of the WHO as the guiding and coordinating authority for international public health. That has been dropped as of April 24. And that's because of all this activity. The next one, Article 3.1, would have erased references to the primacy of, quote, dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedom. They were going to deny that. They had 70 years of history that law was based on, and they were going to change it to a DEI type of process here. That has been dropped. The next one, Article 44, proposals to construct a global censorship of information. This is the information, misinformation, disinformation, has been dropped. Told you I had good news for you. Okay, Annex 1 strengthened the member state to maintain the capacity for controlling their own information, disinformation, because it was set up where Tedros was going to be the direct controller of that. Article 12, positions that would have allowed the WHO to intervene on the basis of a mere potential pandemic, which means he thinks one is coming, that's been dropped. And that was a contentious view. Also deleted was the ability for the WHO to maintain the power in doing that. It went back to the original 2005 status. Here's a big win. All risks with the potential to impact public health, which meant climate change, food supply, abortion, gun control. They could have made all of those an imminent health issue. That's been dropped. Yes, that is huge. Remains to see what the final version is going to be, but he knows he has to do some horse trading here to get this thing to cross the finish line. The scope now remains essential. They're back to focusing just on disease. Mandatory for the pandemic-related infrastructure and subsidies. It was originally set at 5% of the national health budget and then an unspecified percent of GDP. So we have economic redistribution here. That was corrected to where the nations can set their own level according to their capability, which was really good. But what's really interesting about that is in all of this, China got itself listed as a developing nation. So when it comes to having financing all this, they were no longer going to be required to have to pay at the high level. We would end up having to pay for them, even though they have the second largest economy in the world. They are so devious in what they do, and they're so good at it. They're so thorough. Dot every I and they cross every T. Article 4 and 13.1, public spending is a matter of national governments to determine. Article 4.1, plans for the WHO to police compliance with all aspects of the regulations have been materially watered down, which is really, really good. Really quick then, just two more. Article 44, I'm not going to do that. Article 13A.5, proposals for an expedited regulatory approval for novel medicines. That means vaccines produced in 100 days. That's been dropped. Article 23.6, mandating digital health passports, has been dropped. I mean, this is really, really, really significant. So we're having an impact. They're doing this because they want to get this thing passed. So this takes away a lot of the obstacles, although there's still some serious things that have to be addressed. But mark my words, they are not going to change what their ultimate goal what their ultimate goals are. They're just going to get this thing passed, and it's up to us to stay vigilant to make sure that they're going to find another way to make this happen. I can tell you, they're not looking to be fair. This was supposed to be a members-written policy. It wasn't. It was done by elites from the WHO in backdoor with no transparency, no communications. They were supposed to get this out according to the UN Charter. Article 55 says any amendment update has to be issued 4 months in advance. We've already had this conversation. January 27th was their due date. And this was brought before the United Nations and said clearly, and the United Nations says, no, they didn't meet it, therefore it does not qualify. But Tedros found a way around it. Just like last Friday when the pandemic treaty had its deadline and all the news articles came out, it's dead in the water. That afternoon, Tedros says, well, we found a way that we're going to extend it for 2 more weeks. He has no regard for the rule of law. Their value system is different. They only know what they want for themselves, and it's a consolidation of power. They're not really interested in improving health care. That's said over and over and over again. That doesn't mean it's not going to get passed. And there's some serious concerns. I'm just going to give you the highlights of it because you need to hear this okay, the pages, I'm missing one page. Here it is. Oh, I'm sorry, because I had some really good things to tell you, but I'm going to pass on that. I want to tell you what State Shield did that was really powerful. I was too fast with my information. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I know. I tried to do it so I could do it in big print so I could see it. You know? All right. I don't have. Anyway, State Shield had some really big successes. We passed a WHO resolution in Tennessee. We did one in Alabama. Georgia didn't go through, unfortunately, because of technicalities. We passed a land bill in Georgia that got signed by the governor that prevented purchase of land by the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians. We've got the first in the nation land bill that denied jurisdiction to the WHO in Louisiana. And that's going out this week for the total vote. It passed the House, it passed the Senate, now it's going before everybody. We assisted Senator Presley with that. He got 1 million hits the day that he did it on his X account. That's how popular this one was. We passed we have a drone bill pending we talked about technology and about all the spying. The drones are tremendously troublesome. And there's a whole conversation I could have with you on that. We also passed an education bill in Alabama, which meant that every educational institution, whether it takes $1, whereas the federal government is like $250,000, you take $1 from a foreign agent, you have to report it. We want to know who everybody is and how they're being influenced, and then we're going to structure. So we knew that there was a deficiency in what was being done at the states, and we're working principally through governors. So I added to that. I'm going to be done here in 30 seconds, I promise you. The AGs, this has reached international now. I got 22 AGs to sign a letter of consolidation opposing the WHO to President Biden. This is making international news, which was why we had a news conference. We had a meeting this morning with 11 Israeli MPs. I was on the TV station in Croatia on Saturday, and I'm sorry to say, I just picked up the news feed that the Slovakian president was just shot because he had come out and he opposed the WHO, and it was an assassination attempt. Just got it. He hasn't died. But this is a rough game that we're playing here, and it's a win or lose. Win or lose. I'm sorry I can't tell you more about what State Shield is doing. I'm really proud of it, but you're welcome. Sorry, guys. I told you I could talk about. Unfortunately, I had to put a dash between Shield and org. State-shield.org.